Welcome to the deep dive. We take a subject, really dig into it using the info we've got, aiming to give you a real feel for it.
Hmm.
Today, we're looking at a pretty significant slice of West Coast history, actually, the San Francisco crime family. You might also know it as the Lanza family, or, the San
Oh,
Francisco Mafia.
yeah. And our main source for this is a document that really maps out the whole journey of this organization, its beginnings, its activities, leadership, and how it eventually faded away. It's quite a detailed picture of organized crime in one city.
It really is. And you kind of have to understand the time period to get it right. We're talking the Roaring Twenties, Prohibition,
Mm.
that whole era when organized crime really took root in American cities.
Absolutely. Illicit markets were booming, there were power vacuums, and these groups, well, they jumped right in.
So for you listening, if you're interested in how these things work, the sort of dynamics of history, maybe even finding some surprising links, this should be pretty fascinating. A look at how these criminal enterprises get built and run.
Definitely. So, okay, where do we start? The origins.
Right. So the source we're looking at, it points to around 1928 as like the pivotal year. And the main guy early on, Frank Lanza.
Okay.
And the whole thing was based in San Francisco, obviously.
Good.
Specifically, Little Italy, North Beach area really started to solidify in the early 1930s.
But it wasn't exactly a quiet start, was it? The document talks about a pretty serious gang war breaking out before the family really formed. Kicked off April 28, 1928, with the murder of a bootlegger, Jerry Ferry.
Yeah, that seems to be the spark. Ferry gets killed, and it just ignites this whole chain reaction. It wasn't just, one less competitor.
No, it sounds like all-out warfare. What came next?
Well, according to this, it was basically tit-for-tat power plays. Alfredo Scariso, another bootlegger suspected in Ferry's killing, he was murdered later that same year, December 28.
Good.
Then Mario Filippi, who was suspected in Scariso's murder, he was killed. Then Frank Boca, also linked to Scariso, gone by July 29. It was just brutal.
Wow. So this is really about clearing the deck, establishing dominance through violence. You see this pattern a lot, actually, in how these powerful groups start. A really violent struggle, and then one group comes out on top. Did it stop there?
Not quite. The source mentions Gennaro Broccolo being murdered in 1930. And get this, they called him the Al Capone of the West.
Really? Al Capone of the West?
Yeah.
That tells you something about his profile.
Exactly. Big target, clearly. And then Luigi Malvise in 32. He was into hijacking, bootlegging, guns, gunned down in broad daylight in an Italian neighborhood, too. Just shows how brazen it was.
Right. And all these killings. They essentially paved the way for Lanza, didn't they?
That's what the source says. After Malvise was killed in 32, that sort of ended that initial war. And Lanza's gang, his faction, was the strongest one left standing.
So he emerges as the first real boss of the San Francisco family. Okay. The dust settles a bit.
Right.
What kind of operation did he run? What were their main rackets?
Pretty standard stuff for the time, according to this. Loan sharking, definitely. Lending money at crazy interest rates.
Mm-hmm. With serious consequences if you didn't pay.
Right. Plus gun running, prostitution, gambling, narcotics as well. Those were the main income streams.
But there's also that interesting note about Fisherman's Wharf. Lanza co-founding it with Giuseppe Aliotto.
Yeah, isn't that something? This iconic landmark. And potentially partly funded or founded by organized crime figures.
It does make you think, doesn't it? How many legitimate businesses might have, let's say, complicated origins?
True, but Lanza's time at the top wasn't actually that long. He died in 1937.
Right. Natural causes, it seems. So that brings up the succession question. Who takes over?
Anthony Lima. He stepped in after Lanza died.
Okay, Anthony Lima. And it sounds like things got complicated pretty quickly for him, too. There was that incident involving a Chicago gangster, Nick DeJohn.
Yeah, the planned murder. Our source says Lima and his underboss, Michael Abadi, were plotting to kill DeJohn. So they were already dealing with, bigger networks outside SF.
But it didn't exactly go smoothly. They got arrested for it, didn't they?
They did, both Lima and Abadi. But they actually got off.
How did that happen?
Well, the DA at the time, Pat Brown, who later became governor, big name, he declared a mistrial, said he didn't have confidence in the main witness, Anita Venza.
Interesting. So maybe some influence at play or just a weak case? Hard to say.
Yeah, the document doesn't spell it out, but it raises questions. But Lima's luck didn't hold forever. He eventually got convicted of grand theft in 1953.
And that was basically the end of his leadership.
Seems so. Lost his power after that conviction. So the top spot opened up again.
Which brings us to Michael Abadi, who was the underboss.
Mm-hmm.
He becomes the boss then.
Right. And his underboss, James Lanza, Francesco's son, Jimmy the Hat.
Okay. Keeping it in the family, sort of. And Jimmy Lanza.
Hmm.
He was already known to the authorities, wasn't he? That Appalachian meeting.
Exactly. The source mentions police spotting him at the Appalachian meeting in '57. That was that huge Mafia summit in upstate New York that got busted. Big embarrassment for the mob.
Huge deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really blew the lid off the scale of La Cosa Nostra in America. So Abadi's the boss. Jimmy the Hat is underboss. How long did Abadi last?
Not that long either, actually. He got deported to Italy in 1961.
Deported. Wow.
That says, due to criminal activity, he died over there the next year, 1962.
Okay, so another vacancy at the top.
Which leads us straight to James, Jimmy the Hat Lanza, and this is where the story takes a turn towards stability, in a way. Or at least longevity.
Yeah, the document really stresses how long he was in charge. From 61, right after Abadi's deportation, all the way until he died in 2006.
That's what, 45 years? Incredible for a crime boss.
It really is. And during that time, he seemed focused on building bridges, extending the family's connections with other syndicates across the U.S. He saw the value in that network.
He must have had a certain profile. I mean, Life magazine called him out as the SF crime boss back in the late 60s.
Yeah, that's significant publicity, even if it's the kind you probably don't want. It shows he was recognized as the guy.
And there were those rumors, allegations about a friendship with the mayor, Joseph Alioto.
Right. The source mentions that alleged friendship, which Alioto always denied, by the way. But those kinds of whispers, true or not, they stick around and attract attention.
Definitely. And his network went beyond California, didn't it? Las Vegas connections.
Through a guy named William Bones Remmer. Remmer apparently had ties to the Genovese family back in New York. So, yeah, Lanza was plugged into the national scene.
It paints a picture of a very connected, if maybe cautious, leader. The source mentions he was wary of defectors.
Extremely weird, which makes sense, right? Loyalty is everything.
Yeah.
He was apparently very careful about who he brought in, especially later on. Didn't want informants.
So he didn't recruit many new members as the older guys aged out.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
Prioritizing trust over numbers, perhaps.
Right.
Which could also explain the family's eventual decline, maybe. But he definitely kept up ties with other bosses, Joseph Savello in Dallas, Joseph Cerrito over in San Jose, and even his own underboss later on, Gaspar Sciortino, Bill Sciortino. He had family ties to the L.A. family's underboss. It was all very interconnected.
It really sounds like a tight-knit world, even across cities. But there was friction, too. What about Jimmy Franciano, Jimmy the Weasel?
Franciano. Yeah, he was a major figure, eventually turned government witness. According to Franciano himself, he moved to the Bay Area around '73 and initially reported to Lanza.
But they had a falling out.
Apparently so. The story goes, Lanza felt Franciano was bringing too much heat, too much attention to the San Francisco operation. Lanza seemed to prefer staying low-key.
Which is probably why he lasted so long. Keep your head down.
Probably. And there's even a suggestion, though the source presents it carefully, that Lanza might have given the okay for the murder of Joseph Barboza in 1976.
Barboza, the government witness from the New England family.
That's the one. If true, it shows Lanza's reach and willingness to deal with perceived threats, even ones originating far away. Silencing informants was a priority across the board.
Right. So Lanza's reign continues. Decades go by. What happens in the later years? Does the nature of the family change?
Well, we start seeing figures involved in newer criminal trends, like drug trafficking. Sergio Maranghi is mentioned.
Maranghi, Italian immigrant.
Yeah, moved to SF in the late 70s, opened the Anchor Bay Cafe in North Beach in 1980. Lanza apparently saw his money-making potential, especially with drugs, and brought him into the family. The cafe became a regular meeting spot.
But getting into the drug trade is risky, brings more law enforcement attention.
Exactly. And Maranghi eventually got caught up in a big cocaine bust in 1991.
And facing serious time, he flipped.
He did. Became an FBI informant. Gave them information on past deals, associates. A major blow to that code of silence. Lanza values so much. It shows how things were changing, perhaps weakening.
Were others getting busted around that time, too?
Yeah, the document mentions Gaetano Balistreri, owner of the Portofino Cafe, arrested for coke distribution, though that charge was dropped, but then later got busted for running an illegal gambling operation in '94.
So law enforcement was still actively targeting them.
Seems like it. And there was another guy, Steve Trifiro, a made member running gambling near Sacramento. Shows they still had some activity, even if smaller scale and more spread out.
But the real end of that long era was Lanza's death, right?
Absolutely. February 14th, 2006. Died of natural causes at 103. An incredible lifespan, especially in that line of work.
103. Wow. And was that Essentially the end of the family as a functioning unit.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The source notes that the last known made member, Sergio Marangi, the one who flipped, died in October 2022. That really marks the final page for the San Francisco crime family, as documented here.
Okay, so let's try and pull together the key points from this deep dive. What stands out?
Well, first, the timeline. Roughly active from, say, 1928 to Lanza's death in 2006, maybe petering out completely by 2022. That's a long run.
Mm-hmm. And their territory.
Primarily the San Francisco Bay Area, Northern California. But like we said, connections ran much wider.
And their activities were, well, pretty much what you'd expect, right?
Yeah, the classics. Racketeering, loan sharking, extortion, prostitution, bookmaking, bribery, narcotics, gambling, the whole menu.
They had allies. Bonanno, Chicago outfit, Detroit, Genovese, LA, San Jose. Quite a network. And rivals, especially early on, just local gangs.
Right. And the leadership succession is key. Francesco Lanza starting it all.
Then Anthony Lima, briefly.
Then Michael Abadi.
And finally, the incredibly long reign of James Jimmy the Hat Lanza, with guys like Lima, Abadi, Lanza himself, and Bill Ciartino serving as underbosses along the way.
Exactly. Those leaders, their styles, their connections, they really define the family's history over almost 80 years.
It's been a really interesting look into how one specific regional crime family operated, evolved, and eventually faded. That longevity under James Lanza is just striking.
It really is.
So, thinking about how it all ended, how this documented family essentially disappeared, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the key things, the main factors that really drive the rise, and maybe more importantly, the fall of organized crime in a specific place? Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for digging into this with me.